A real favor.
Good.
And, Oh.
And I've known Terry since 1971, and he was at that was the year I started working at Cahokia Mounds, and he was digging at Mound 72 at that time. In the following year, I ran a dig on the East Stockade excavations, and Terry was a crew member there, and another year of the 75 or 76, he kind of helped with the public field school program, and he got his master's from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville and his Ph.D. from St. Louis University, and he worked as an archaeologist for the Corps of Engineers as their chief archaeologist for this area for I don't know how many years, but
About 35 years. Yeah.
And retired a few years now, and I twisted his arm to give us a presentation tonight, which I think you'll find interesting on this.
Well, you said I'd get $10,000?
Yes.
Okay, that's right.
After you're done. So, Terry Norris.
Thank you. Known Bill a long time. I regret that, but is this thing on? Are we?
Checking. We had somebody say there was no sound, but we're gonna check. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Bill asked me to come over and talk about shipwrecks and things like that. As he said, I was a district archaeologist for a lot of years and did all kinds of work in the central Mississippi River Valley. And in 1988, we had a historic low water on the Mississippi. It was about, you all hear me okay? I think it was about a 50-year low, and it closed navigation on the river for a period of time. And at that time, I had, well, everybody's read Life on the Mississippi, Samuel Clemens' book, and he mentioned, and I had read that, and mentioned a steamboat wreck every mile from St. Louis to the Ohio River that he was aware of. He was a river pilot and an author. And I got thinking, the water was, I mean, the Mississippi was really low. Down at Commerce, just opposite Thebes, Illinois, you could almost walk across the river right there. And I got thinking, I thought, well, if there were, and it's 182 miles, 182 and a half miles from St. Louis to the confluence of the Ohio today. And he talked about a steamboat wreck every mile. I thought, man, there's probably a lot of boats out there. And what I wound up doing, I had 3 helicopter trips, both banks of the river, and low level, and landed on everything that I thought was a steamboat. And anyway, that's how I got interested in it, and I subsequently did other work on vessels. So anyway, we're going to talk about what's happened on the river in the last 10,000, 20,000 years. So here we go. Maybe. Come on, Bill. This is I took this picture down. This is in Mexico City at the Anthropology Museum down there. That's an imperial mammoth. Most of the elephant-like things we find around here are mastodons. As an adjunct to what I'm about to say, I came into work on a Friday one time, and one of our dredges, I'm getting off the subject here, one of our dredges was about 7 miles up from the confluence of the Ohio, and they were dredging out in the river. And on this particular there are 2 kinds of dredges. There's kind of an auger dredge. It's like a big twirling thing that's like a drill that sucks things up. And then there's one that's like a big vacuum cleaner. It's flat. Well, this particular dredge had the vacuum cleaner thing. Well, they lifted the thing up, and there's a mastodon skull on top of the vacuum cleaner. And the pilot called up, and I went down and met the thing out in the middle of the woods. I don't even know how they got a boat, or anyway. I wound up bringing this, and it was a juvenile mastodon. Yet the skull was about this big, and it was a Friday night. The tusks were not there, but I kept it at the over the weekend at the house, and all the kids in the neighborhood came over and saw the baby mastodon. So it has nothing to do with this. But anyway, people have been. Hey, what are you doing? Back up. You want me to move along? Is it? People have been, Native Americans have been around here at least 12,000 years, and they're arguably a lot longer. And what it looks like now is they were, coming over the Bering Strait, and also, I guess Stanford talks about, they probably came over from the Iberian Peninsula from the east, and along the glacial ice in boats, and then wound up on the east coast somewhere. Anyway, people got here in small bands, and hunted the various animals that were here. We don't really know. We find artifacts out in the river. Clovis points have been found at the confluence. Other tools, but there's inference that they were using rivercraft and that. Obviously, they were traveling along the rivers because there's the concentrations of these really early people's occupations are along these big river systems, but no boats or anything. The first one one of the oldest ones was found in 1976. It's the Ringler. Okay, Ringler dugout. It was in northern Ohio, and it's oak, and the one in the museum, that's bald cypress, is that? Okay. But anyway, the Ringler dugout is oak. It looked like it had been, and it's about 3,000 years old. It would be during the woodland period. People were in villages and beginning to grow and intensively gather crops, staying in one place for a while. They were out in the water, and this is evidence, and it looks like this one had been burned inside, and I don't know if the one at Cahokia is you have.
There's a little bit of charring in a few places.
Okay, all right, okay. That's the dimension. This thing was rugged. I mean, it was really thick and big and bulky, not really navigable, but okay. Now, when the English got down on the East Coast, a man named, John White did a lot of the drawings, but he recorded kind of ethnographic things on how the Native Americans were doing different things. Am I in your way here? Can you see that? Okay. As, how they would make canoes, and this shows where they're burning out the hull. And this is one way you can hollow them out, but I was talking to somebody the other day, and you can only do this on certain species of wood. Some trees don't react well to this. It'll split the hulls. But that's the way they did it up on the East Coast. Okay. Cahokia, there have been a lot since the Ringler dugout in 1976. There have been a lot of canoes that have been found, lots of them down in Florida in the, when there'd be episodes of drought. I mean, in a couple of these lakes there looked like 20, 30 where you could see them. Cahokia, they had these. I mean, there were canoes at Cahokia. We've got, and I'll show you a picture, but there probably are all kinds of canoes in in Horseshoe Lake. I don't know why we have not found anything in Horseshoe Lake. They're out there somewhere. We just haven't hit them, and I'll show you why I say that in just a second. Anyway, that's Cahokia. You all know about Cahokia. Okay. Who's doing this talk? Don't be a, you know. This is an example. I think this was from Spiro, you know, in Oklahoma. It's a marine shell, but it shows a canoe and shows the guys, you know, in the some kind of a banner up on top of it, and as they're going along. Okay. So this is Mississippian. Okay. This is I think Mark Wagner gave me this. This is down, I think, in the Shawnee Forest, down in southern Illinois. Can you see his boat? And then there's, you know, multiple people in it, and it looked like canoe or paddles. Can you all see that? Okay. So they're, and when the Spanish got here, so the Mississippians are using the river. They're using, I mean, they're these big river systems are their highways. When DeSoto came in the 1540s and met, some of the meetings were nice and some of them weren't, but he had a scribe with him, and he described one of these guys that was chronicling the trip. Okay. You know, mentioned that there's some really interesting anecdotes in these notes, but they're talking about 100 canoes, you know, 75 people in a canoe. Okay, these are big, probably cypress, bald cypress canoes. And they're interesting. Some of these encounters were less friendly than others were. Okay. This was a canoe that came out in, oh shoot, it, it came out, there was a habitat, an ecosystem restoration project in, I think this was on the Red River, and I want to say it's in northern Louisiana. I'm not sure, but this was a Corps project, and they had some Fish and Wildlife Service folks. They were in an old side channel, and they were dredging. They were making it deeper for fish habitat and duck, whatever, animal habitat, and they were blowing this material back and discharging the material up against a bank. I'm making this up, but apparently somebody just, they're standing there and turn around, and this canoe is sticking out of the bank that they're blowing all this stuff. This thing is over 30 feet long. Okay. It's got a bill on it. At its thickest, it's 1/2 inch thick. And the bow and stern have a nose, kind of like a duck's bill, and has a hole. The bow has a hole in it where they could stick a canoe or stick a paddle in the through the hole into the muddy riverbank, and that's what would hold the canoe in place. Okay. Yeah. And this thing had split, and I guess they, you know, at period of use, they were. This is modern string on there, but I don't know what's happened to that thing. But that's quite a, and it was about 35 feet long, as I remember. But and this, what's interesting about this is actually the oldest surviving Polaroid photograph that we have. This is Pere Marquette jumping out of the, I'm lying, 1673. This is these coureurs de bois, you know, the French, the travelers of the woods, the explorers and fur trappers. There were canoes all over at that, you know, and these were big canoes. The canoes that were up in the Great Lakes areas are different than the watercraft that were down here. And the reason was, up there you had the portage, you'd go from lake to lake to lake. It's glaciated, and you'd have to pick your canoe up and all your stuff and move to the next lake. These were birch bark, and they were different sizes. Some of these the big Voyager canoes, the fur trappers canoes, were big. I'll show you an example. But these things weren't very popular down here. Marquette when Marquette and Joliet came down here in 1673, they mentioned at the mouth of the Missouri River, what they described as the Missouri River, they hit a fish, probably a big sturgeon, that poked a hole in the canoe. And there's all kinds of flotsam, floating debris that was coming down. So if you had that kind of stuff in the water, a birch bark canoe isn't, but okay. These are examples. I told you those Voyager canoes that would have been used by the French around here or up north. That's how big they're. This is a canoe that you go out and you go down the Jacks Fork and Current Rivers around here. That's aluminum canoe. Quite a bit bigger, but it gives you an idea. Now, in the beginning, probably about 1750, these are examples of the different kinds of vessels that were around on the water at that time in this area. Keelboats start appearing, and a keelboat it has a central keel, and the first ones were built on the Ohio or the Belle River, the beautiful river. And a lot of them were built up in what's now Pittsburgh. And these were about 15 feet wide and about 50 feet. Longest ones were about 50 feet long. And they were for commodities, like expensive stuff, whiskey and were just different commodities. Okay. You and I would have, or at least I would have been going down. You wouldn't have been on something like that would have been expensive to operate. You'd have been on a flatboat. These flatboats have been described as floating barns, or floating, not barns, farms. They had all of their stuff was on these things, and they actually had a firebox in the center of these. And they could cook on them. You'd have fire brick or some kind of stone so you didn't burn the bottom out of the hull. But these were one-way things. They built them up on the Ohio down the river, and you get to you can't go upstream with these, but you can certainly go down. There also were There were when the Spanish came here after the 7 Years' War. 1763, Spanish took control of the west bank of the Mississippi River, all that territory until the Louisiana Purchase, and they had patrols that would go on the Mississippi River, and they had small, kind of like just small galleons. I mean, they were about as big as a French bateau, like a large. Just a big, almost, well, they're bigger than rowboats, but they had guns on them, but they were swivel guns. Just a small cannon that would shoot something about as big as a golf ball, and would be mounted, and you could turn it like you could turn a regular firearm only. And this is one of them that operated around between St. Genevieve and St. Louis at that time. All right. Now, 1811, a profound thing happened on the inner waterways. Livingston a man named Livingston developed a steam-powered boat. And he built one. One of them that he built, the earliest one, was called the New Orleans. That was in 1811. It's a fascinating story if you ever want to read about the voyage of the New Orleans. It went from Pittsburgh down to New Orleans. It took 82 days, and that's not what this is, but took 82 days. The actual travel time was about 2 weeks, but on the trip, they had to, at Louisville, before there's a lock and dam there now. Before they built the locks and dams, there was a rock shelf across the river, and only at high water could you pass. There was a spot about 20 feet wide that you could pass at high water. That's the reason the keel boats were 15 feet wide. Well, the ones that were built later on the Mississippi River were called Mississippi barges. They were up to 25 feet wide and 75 feet long. They just got bigger. But anyway, that voyage of the New Orleans is fascinating. The boat caught fire. His wife gave birth on the way down to New Orleans. Indians chased them, and they could go just about as fast as a boat could go. And they had to wait for the high water. And anyway, and they claimed it was a raging success. I can't imagine. It sounds horrible, but 1817, the first boat comes up. You know, St. Louis was founded in 1764. French village, then Spanish took over. Technically it was a Spanish village, but it was all French people. St. Louis was, you all know, the gateway to the way. It was an important village. Zebulon Pike, a steamboat, comes up in July of 1817. This had profound effects on the Mississippi River. You see what's coming out of here. These things, they burned on the Ohio. They burned coal because you had access to coal there. On the Mississippi, you burned wood. Anyway, Zebulon Pike. All right, this is 1817. There's one steamboat. By 1850, there's 700 steamboats that are running from Pittsburgh to New Orleans to St. Louis. 700. This is the riverfront in St. Louis. This is a daguerreotype that was done, I think, by Easterly, probably around 1850. First steamboats, the ones before 1850 had the 2 paddle wheels on the sides. This is generally speaking, and then after that, steamboat or the paddle was on the back of them. Doesn't make any difference. It's just the way things. But St. Louis riverfront. All right. This is an interesting lithograph. It again shows the number of boats at St. Louis. But what I find fascinating is how much big horses were. See, these horses are almost 2 stories tall at that time. They must have fed them better. Anyway, that's so. All right. Coal. They were burning a large steamboat. Again, there's 700 boats on the river. A small steamboat, a packet boat, burned between 35 and 50 cords of wood in a 24-hour period, 8 by 8 by 4. A large steamboat burned up to 75 cords of wood in a 24-hour period. What that means is, there's 700 boats. Everybody was in the wood business. Every house along the river had these staves. They look like you were building a fence. Those are 8 feet long. The boilers were just a little bit better than 8 feet long. Every farmer was selling wood. They were cutting. They would get wood that floated down. They would get wood. They would cut wood. What was happening? All right. What was happening? They were defoliating the bank lines of the river. And anytime you take the vegetation off the edges of the water, you destabilize the bank lines. the river goes whoosh. And to compound the problem, a man named, an engineer named Henry Shreve in the 1840s, the problem with it, you're cutting the wood down, but then a lot of the things, as the river is degrading, the trees are falling into the water, and you have, Samuel Clemens, the term, Tom Sawyer, one of the characters in the books. Well, Sawyer is a nautical term. It's a river term that pilots used. What a Sawyer is, when a branch falls in the water, or a tree falls in the water, and it's in a current, the root ball is lodged down here, and the current's going from this side this way, and it's pushing the thing down, and the tree is going like this, and it's like a saw motion. And if you're in a boat and you're coming upstream and you happen to be at the point where it's under the water, you can't see it, and then it comes up and rips the hull out. The average life of a steamboat was 18 months from brand new to being lost. And that was from snags, hitting obstructions like Sawyers, fires, boiler explosions. Worst maritime disaster to this day on the inner rivers was the Sultana. It was a river boat that was bringing, poor guys, Union prisoners of war that were coming up from these hellish camps down south. And it was overloaded. A couple thousand people. The boilers blew up, and anyway, another story. But this is, when the bank lines default, or when we lost the bank lines. Oh, and Henry Shreve, the engineer, he gets an idea to take snag boats out. They build a fleet of snag boats. They clear 200 yards on both sides of the river to keep the obstructions from going into the river. That compounded the problem with, making it. What happens, this is the town of St. Mary, Missouri. St. Genevieve's right up here. Chester is Chester's right here. This was the original site of Kaskaskia. Kaskaskia was the first capital. It was founded in 1703. This was the river. This was the bank line of the river when Kaskaskia was right here. April of 1881, there must have been a flood event. It wasn't the catastrophic flood, but it was an event. The river had been eroding, and the river jumped into this is the Kaskaskia River, and it came down right here and before 1881, met the Mississippi right here. Well, in April of 1881, the old Mississippi broke into this channel, captured this much of the channel, widened it, destroyed Kaskaskia over a period of years. There wasn't catastrophic loss of life, but anyway, the channel, because of that defoliation, is now 7 miles from where it was when this was recorded. That's okay. Just an example of some of that. Okay, here's one of these boats that was at the end of its 18-month run. That's just an average. I mean, some of them, Okay. So we come up to 1988 and my survey. So this is the helicopter. This was Foster helicopter. We landed down. This is Tower Rock. It's now just above. How many of you have been to Tower Rock? You know where it is?
I've seen it.
Okay, it's right opposite Grand Tower. It's a phenomenal thing. LaSalle in the 1680s put a cross up on top of it. It's a real landmark. But anyway, you could walk out there. It was so low. I carved my wife's initials in a tree up here. But, that's another story too. But anyway, we got. I got 30. I found 39 vessels, and only 9 steamboats, or pieces of 9 steamboats. The rest of them are. I'll show you. Okay. And that's, this is one of them. This is a barge, but it's a later barge. I mentioned to you, that the flat bottom boats that the immigrants came down the river on, there's only one of those that has survived. Mark Wagner found that down on the Ohio. There's only one of those that's known to exist. I get a lot of them were taken apart. Anecdotally, they say that they took them apart and used the wood for, houses and things like that. So, but anyway, this is one of the, okay. Here's another. This is the decking off of one. All right. Okay. This is this is down by Peevely, Missouri, and you can see these boulders when there's a railroad track that's up in this where this blue is up here. That railroad was laid out in the 1850s. This vessel, obviously, this material that they blasted out to make the railroad is sitting on top of that, which suggests to me that boat was there before they blew it up. Anyway, this is part of a model, what's called a model barge. It's a precursor of like these modern steel barges you have today. They were big workhorses. Were used all the way up into the early 20th century. Okay. This is and most of the wrecks that occurred, the shipwrecks that occurred on the Mississippi, there was no loss of life associated with them. They hit these snags, and then pilots were able to get them over into shallow water. The city of Saltillo, this went down in 1810 or 1910. This is unusual. This one, there were several people lost their lives as they were getting off the boat. The thing shifted and several people went in the water. But the reason I want to show you this, okay, this is the archaeological signature of the city of Saltillo. It looks like where somebody backed up a pickup truck and dumped out some bricks and nails, and I mean it's a discrete signature. It doesn't. This one is unusual. You can see some of the steam apparatus, which would suggest that there was something going on that had steam. But I mean it's discrete. It's not. It's hard to identify really. But that's what remains of a steamboat now. There are other instances where if a steamboat went down in deep water and was covered quickly, you get what's called an anaerobic condition where it's oxygen free. Then you get really excellent preservation. Anyway, okay. This is St. Louis, and this is down near the Ohio. These yellow dots are where I found, it was the results of that survey in 1988. There's subsequent work that's been done, but I'm retired and don't care about it. So this was the most important work that was ever done. Now, I mentioned to you, this isn't on the Mississippi. It's not in the district. Have any of you been up to Kansas City to see the Arabia? Yes. How many of you? Hands. Okay, if you have not, the next time you go to Kansas City, if you have an opportunity, go see it's called the Great White Arabia Shipwreck Museum. This was one of the, it was a packet boat, was fully laden. They described it as a floating Walmart. Fully laden, fully loaded, sunk in deep water, and was buried quickly in deep water. And it was one of those anaerobic conditions where everything was preserved. The river shifted, like I showed you on that one photograph. Out in a bean field, this thing wound up out in a bean field. Private sellers took magnetometers, sophisticated metal detectors, essentially. It can read things deeply buried. Anyway, they found it and dug down, had to put relief wells all the way around it. Anyway, Arabia went down. Only loss of life was that mule. And that mule was owned by a carpenter. And he claimed all his life that he untied his mule, and the thing was so stubborn it just wouldn't get off. Well, when they excavated it, the mule was on back, had a saddle on, the bridle was still tied to the so the mule stayed where he was tied. Okay. But this is the story about the stuff. Okay. That's the location of the Arabia, and this is right in downtown Kansas City. When you're driving through Kansas City on your way to Colorado, you drop down to through the old quarter, the old part of just before you get down onto the river. It's off on the left. Okay. Anyway, this is as they're looking for it. They're down on the hull now, the boilers, and okay. What they did, they took all of the artifacts and they recreated. Westport was a name of, like Westport Plaza and stuff like that. Westport was the first name of Kansas City. It was the westernmost port at that time. And this went down in September of 1856. And they took artifacts thematically, different kinds of things, and they created storefronts. Like this is the hardware store. Okay. These you cannot imagine, I don't know how many millions of artifacts. Okay. Firearms, powder flasks, all the stuff that was going up. This thing was going up to Fort Benton in Montana, and it didn't make it. Okay, but okay. All the leather goods, beaver hats, blacksmith stuff, all just hundreds and hundreds of pairs of shoes. All right. This has nothing to do with shipwrecks, but it's just a fascinating, for some reason, I guess before modern towboats and things like that, the Mississippi River would freeze like that, and you could drive teams across the river in the winter. I guess it had to get a little colder than it did this year, but okay. And I've copied and stole George Caleb Bingham's, and he's got that's Tower Rock in the back of it. All right. And that's a black bear at midnight in our yard. I did see about 45 minutes. You said to run it that long, so.
Anybody have any questions? Jerry?
Good. Anyway, there's, yes.
I had a great grandfather that lived at St. Labori, one of the earliest settlers there. And in the St. Clair County history which was probably written in the I can't remember what year that was. This. They said that his occupation was to raise pigs, chickens, and everything, and put a little boat together and float down to St. Mary's River to where the Mississippi at Chester, and then go all the way down to New Orleans, and then he would sell all the livestock, and they'd take the boat apart, sell the lumber like you said, and then he'd catch a steamboat back. Bernard Dingworth was his name, Bernard Dingworth. So it was one of those, was that one little boat, the smallest one that you showed, would that have been an example? That
Yes, a flatboat.
But you said they carried a farm with them?
Yes, they would just, that's how you would move your whole family and all of your, possessions. I mean, they talk about the good old days.
That was a big market. New Orleans was a big market.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Has anybody done more research since you were there, tracking down wrecks?
I don't, to answer that question, I know there has been other, several other significant steamboat wrecks that have been found. And in fact, this Hawley, this private, the man that found that boat, the Whistles and Bells boat that had all the stuff on it, he was an electrician and out of Kansas City, and it was just private enterprise. And I think they found another vessel, and there have been several excavated, but none like that. But I'm sure there's, I see probably the same kinds of things you see. Every now and then there'll be something in Archaeology magazine or in the newspaper that where people have found certain things, but not comprehensive. The only other thing, the river hasn't gotten that low since then. I mean, it really is that was a significant low.
Low a few weeks or months ago.
But it wasn't low. As an example, I checked. There's one place down by there's a place called Commerce, Missouri, which is if you're driving out of Cape Girardeau, the next town you come to is Scott City. Well, if you make a left, you go over. There's a town that's right on the Mississippi River called Commerce. There's not much commerce going on in Commerce these days. It's maybe 10 people, 10 houses. A site that's 10,000 years old on the Illinois side. It was a natural crossing point of the river. It actually, that spot right there at Commerce is the beginning of the Gulf of Mexico. No, I mean, it's not a joke. That rock shelf, everything below Commerce, Missouri, all the way down to New Orleans is alluvial sediment. It's there's no mountains, no rocks, no limestone below that point, all the way to the Gulf. That was the Gulf of Mexico. It's 2
years.
Yeah, back in the day, but. Yeah, I've got anyway. So, I'll let you.
How much is in Mississippi did you start? I mean, where did you start?
Our district, the thing I was, I had authority to go from, I went from St. Louis south. River navigation before the locks and dams. Here, wait, sorry, I get out of there. Before the locks and dams, most of the significant river navigation stopped at St. Louis. There are shipwrecks above that and smaller boats, but in the fall of the year, the water levels fell to such a point that most of the stuff was going on from St. Louis south.
How far south?
I went down to the Ohio River. All I did, yeah.
And with the helicopters, how did you said you did it with helicopters?
Mm-hmm.
You saw the...
You get pretty low and then just stop and then just landed on them. You land on the sandbars and things like that. Yeah. It was one of the trips. Clark Thomas was the pilot. He owned Foster helicopters. I guess he may still. We got caught in a fog, and well, it's a long story. What happened with this? We had 3 teams that were out doing things, and instead of this one team, somebody got hurt, and instead of staying where they were supposed to be, they moved to another point. Clark couldn't find them, and the teams were all out. We got late in the. We were losing light, and it was not a. Fog came in. It was so foggy, Clark couldn't see. We went. There are wires across the Mississippi River. We went under the JB Bridge. Under the JB Bridge, and he could see. He put us down. I mean, he could not see. He had radar, but we were right on the water, probably 3 feet off the water, just going up. And he put us down in Cronolette Park, and he said to me, I was up front with him with the headgear anyway. He said, I'm glad to be on the ground, which is not something you want to hear from my, so, yeah, that was.
Terry, you're really knowledgeable about St. Louis as well as the river. What do you foresee can be done right on the riverfront compared to other cities, even Louisville, whatever? Because
Well,
it's just barren for both ships. What do you foresee would be a good anything? What?
You mean to stabilize? There have been attempts.
There, at part of
You mean to?
history.
I won't get into the social ills of what's going on. I mean, they tried to make an interpretation of that. The big mound. There were 27 mounds in downtown St. Louis, and the biggest one was up near where Stan Musial's bridge came across, and they had a marker on it and stuff. Well, that's the stuff. I don't even know how they pulled that stuff off of there, the bronze markers, but really won't. I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't think it's a good answer. I think we're going to really have to crash and burn hard, personally, before anything will happen. But what was interesting, I used to take a walk at lunch and go down to the river. The cobblestone levees, you've all been down at a ball game, those red cobblestones, the granite that's down there from Elephant Rocks and down around Tom Sauk Mountain. It's all, I guess it's Precambrian, anyway. Somebody was putting another dead man, a thing to moor barges to, these giant weights, and they dug down through that. And what was fascinating to me, they dug down about, as tall as that wall is there. And they dug down through the cobblestone, and right below it, about less than a meter below it, is a dark layer that is just, it's all burned stuff. And what it was, that's when the city, what they did, when the city of St. Louis burned, a large portion of it burned in 1849, they took all of that rubble and pushed it onto the riverfront and then capped it with there's another levee. There's a limestone levee down below all that burned stuff, which is interesting. And, I suspect, the French stuff's down below that, but
Well,
anyway.
it's not inviting the riverfront. Right?
I don't go to. No, it isn't. I'll have to agree with you. Yeah.
I have a question on I have an old historic map that somebody wrote, and it's Monroe County, and all along the river, like as tight as you can get a lettering is landing, this landing, that landing.
Oh, yeah.
And like they're stacked so tight. What constitutes a landing?
Well, any place that they could, one of these small steamboats could get up to, and where they could get commodities. If a big farmer's got an orchard there, you'd offload the apples and, like
That have had it
Harrison.
so close, though. I mean, they're
Anytime the way I mentioned to you about the all the farmers would sell wood, to the folks. We're getting thirsty. They would sell wood. They would have signs out, out there, and the boats would just pull up, and they had kind of an honor system. You can't imagine it, but they had a sack there, and they'd take the wood and put some money in it. But I'd be in another boat right behind the guy that bought the wood and steal a sack of money. No. Hey, you'll have to cut that out of your presentation.
You're recorded now.
Yes. Okay. True. Just kidding. But no, there were all kinds of it's what I find fascinating. Just down south of St. Louis, my wife and I drive down the Illinois side. We photograph a lot of different birds. In fact, the eagles are back. We've been watching this group of eagles, or this pair of eagles, for the last 10 years, and they're nesting now. She's sitting on the nest again. But right down, it's by Harrisonville, Fountain Bluff, between Columbia and Valmeyer. But the little town of Harrisonville, it was the first county seat of Monroe County, and it's essentially gone. And it was a thriving river town. Well, it was a county seat, but there's a grave out in the middle of the cornfield out there that you'll see if you're driving down the river road. It's on the left, an obelisk, and there's another one, a man named John Chance. And it said he died in 1825, and it said one of the first settlers in the Illinois country. And the Illinois country is what they called Illinois. It was a French term for that whole region. So, but
All right,
so.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.